Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women's Major Group's monthly meeting series, Until All of Us Are Free, an intersectional feminist fishbowl series. Today, we're going to talk about Black and Afro-descendant communities' rights, and we're so grateful that you're all here for this important discussion. Before we begin, please let me remind you of some of the accessibility and logistics notes. We have interpretation to Spanish and French. So please select the language you'd like to listen to the meeting in using the globe sign at the bottom of your screens. You should also select English if you'd like to listen in English. So please do not remain in off mode. That makes interpretation very hard for our amazing translators on board today. Maybe I can give the floor to Marianne Helica to say this in Spanish, and then we can also have it in French, so everyone will know.
Gracias, Shanaz. Thank you. Buenos días. Hoy estaremos proveyendo interpretación en español y en francés. Si están conectadas a la reunión desde su computador, abajo a mano derecha ven el globo que dice interpretación. Cuando le hagan clic, elijan el idioma que prefieran. Les sugerimos que silencien el audio original y eso es todo. Escucharán en español si desean. Si están conectados desde su teléfono, abajo a mano derecha de la pantalla hay 3 puntos que dice más. Cuando tocan los puntos, eligen interpretación de idiomas y su idioma de preferencia. También vamos a poner las instrucciones en el chat. Muchas gracias. And now I pass the mic to my French interpreter colleagues.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue à cette réunion. Donc, il y a de l'interprétation en français disponible. Si vous avez besoin d'écouter le français, pour accéder au canal, cliquez sur le symbole de globe en bas de votre écran, choisissez français et vous pouvez couper l'audio original. Si vous vous connectez depuis un smartphone, cliquez sur les 3 petits points et choisissez interprétation de langue, français, puis terminé. Merci, bonne réunion.
Merci bien, muchas gracias to all of you. So today, if you have any accessibility or safety needs, you can always write to me, Shehnaz Klimaz, in chat, and I do my best to support you. And I'd also like to note that our meeting today is only open for the Women's Major Group members as participants, but we will record the meeting and the first hour of the meeting and share it on our YouTube channel and social media as a resource on how feminist movement can be better allies with our Black and Afro-descendant feminist colleagues. The open discussion part at the end will not be recorded. In this meeting series, it is also of utmost importance that we cultivate a safe space centering the demands, voices, and analysis of those most marginalized in our communities and in our feminist movements. For this reason, discriminatory remarks, hate speech, the denial of self-proclaimed identities, anti-rights discourse, and other forms of discrimination against the folks and groups speaking in these meetings will not be tolerated. If such an incident occurs, the person will be removed from the Zoom platform after one warning. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor now to our Francophone Africa organizing partner, Cecile Ndjebet from WECF, who will moderate our meeting today. The floor is yours, Cecile.
Thank you. Thank you so much, listeners, and welcome. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Good night, even. I'm sure some are at night now. Yes, I would like to thank you for giving me the floor, Senaz. In the context of a rising anti-rights movement, attacks on trans and Black lives, and divisions in the global feminist and women's movement, the Women's Major Group stand by our core principles and intersectional feminisms, collective liberation, and human rights for all people, and leaving no one behind. It is a crucial moment to truly reaffirm and build our capacity in understanding and speaking about key issues, especially regarding the right of communities and peoples that are most marginalized within the feminist movement. It is also a key moment to reflect on how we can do better as an intersectional feminist collective. This month, we will be talking about the right of Blacks and Afro-descendant communities, especially the right of Blacks and Afro-descendant women, girls, non-binary and gender-expansive people. The demand for justice by Black-descendant communities is a century-long struggle. At the same time, Black and Afro-descendant feminists have been a very strong, but unfortunately sometimes overlooked voice in the feminist movement as well. However, are we able to show the same support and solidarity with Black and Afro-descendant feminists and communities without focusing on human rights and liberation for all? Sustainable development will not be achieved. We hope to listen to our speakers who are experts on this topic about why they do this work, what are the systemic causes and barriers in front of the realization of Black and Afro-descendant communities and people's rights, as well as how women major group can be more supportive in our joint struggles. The first hour of our meeting will be a fishbowl discussion among our speakers. In the last half of an hour, we will stop the recording so we can have an open conversation in a safe space all together. As part of this meeting series, an incredible feminist illustration, Sona Kasha will be doing graphic recording that beautifully visualize and summarize each of our discussions. So without any more delay, I'm honored to introduce the powerful women who will be speaking with us today. First, we have Amina Doherty, Black Feminist Fund. Amina Doherty is a Nigerian Antiguan feminist. In her work, she funds the natural flow between creativity and activism. Amina is a content creator and creative who strives to bring together people and ideas to create positive change. Through actively supporting transformational work from artists, dreamers, activists, and organizations that strengthen social change, Amina is focused on helping to build a more powerful, equal, and just world. Currently, Amina is a co-founder of the Black Feminist Fund and the director of the Women's Voice and Leadership Caribbean program at the Equality Fund. She is the incoming co-chair of the Global Fund for Women Board of Directors, a very recent announcement which we are congratulating for her for. She is a founding member and the first coordinator of FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund. And then we have Miriam Mukalazi, a woman engaged for a common future. Miriam Mukalazi is a board of trustees member of WECF and works as a scholar activist on gender, peace, and security policies. Miriam looks into approaches of Afro-tourism and possibilities to decolonize foreign and security policies. She's previously worked for the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy at the UN Women Germany. For her current PhD study research, Miriam received the Charlemagne Fellowship, and she's an alumna of the Black Europe Summer School.
Elle a reçu la bourse Charlemagne et elle est une ancienne élève de l'école d'été Black
Paula Barreto, National
suivante, c'est Anna Paula
Collective.
Barreto.
Anna Paula Barreto is the Transnational Birth Equity Director for the National Birth Equity Collaborative. She has a Master of Arts in International Affairs from the New School and she's a fellow of the United Nations Fellowship Program for people of African descent. Anna is an activist and a researcher on intersections of race or gender, global health, and the earth. She's more than 15 years of experience. She has more than 15 years of experience as a human rights professional, working in several countries in the Americas and Africa, doing innovative work on racial justice, political participation, and reproductive justice. Anna is the co-curator of the Black Brazilian Film Festival in the African continent, organized in partnership with the United Nations at the Brazilian Embassy in Addis Ababa in 2018. She's also co-founder of Barreto 111, a project that teaches young people in the favelas of Brazil how to use media tools to tell their own stories and disrupt police brutality through storytelling. So, to start our discussion, we will open the floor to our speakers with a question. Our speakers, please raise your hand to indicate you would like to speak, and I will be giving you the floor. We will have 10 minutes for each question, so please keep an eye on time. Please also consider this is a conversation among you, and we ask participants to just listen, learn, and reflect for now. And we put any questions you may have in the chat to be addressed later. So let's start our discussion with the first question. And our first question will focus on the root causes. Here it is. How does anti-Black racism persist and continue to be perpetuated across UN spaces, as well as how is it part of the colonial history of the UN? So any of our speakers who would like to take the floor, please just raise your hand and then I will give you the floor. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Miriam, I see you smiling. Why don't you go first? You're smiling like you're ready to go.
Please go ahead, Miriam.
No, I was just smiling because I'm just so happy to be here and take part into this in the panel.
You're welcome. You have the floor.
Okay, then I'm going to start. So I think what I can see from my perspective or from my work on gender, peace, and security, I can definitely see a lot of colonial patterns when it comes how we define gender, peace, and security, where we look at to actually realize the UN policies that deal with gender, that deal with security, insecurity, and peace. And in particular, in that case, we can definitely see that there's this dynamic that mostly global North countries, they design the policies and then they see the global South in general as side of implementation. Although we know that the drivers for the gender peace security policies have been from conflict affected areas, mainly in the global South, not just, but mainly. And this is
something where we can really see this colonial pattern of, okay, white Western people in the global North, they see themselves as knowledge producers, as policymakers, and then they identify brown and Black bodies as objects of implementing their policies. So I think I'm going to stop here and then just going to listen what the others have to add.
I can jump in. I'm happy to follow Miriam, because I think, you know, when you look at sort of the UN, right, and you look at the history of the UN, I think that anti-Black racism kind of is part and parcel of the UN's history, unfortunately. And so it runs deep as part of the UN's history. And I think that that history continues to be part of the globalization, just kind of the continuation of the legacy of colonialism. And we see that continuation, that kind of unequal terms of how even we think about trade, how we think about the ways in which sort of injustice against Black people around the world kind of continues to be perpetuated in the way that we talk about policy, in the way that we talk about, even the ways that we talk about everything from power relations. And when we talk about sort of, it's not even talking about how we're shifting power, it's just talking about power over, right? And so it's an unfortunate way that the system of oppression kind of has continued, that legacy of colonialism has continued, right? An unfortunate history that has continued. And I think what's really unfortunate, even if you look at sort of the SDGs, which were supposed to be sort of transformative policies that were sort of recently put in place, they sort of even lacked any sort of conversation around racism, right? And so very recently there was sort of I'm sorry, I'm losing track of my train of thought. A statement that was signed by over 80 NGOs that said there's a lack of even statements around racism in the SDGs. These SDGs are supposed to be something that is transformative in the ways that we're talking about the future of our world, and they are even lacking any attention around racism. And so for me, that sort of kind of signals the way that the UN is even thinking about racism, right? The silence of the SDGs around racism. And so I think for me, that's food for thought. And it's just something important to think about when you think about the colonial history of the UN, and also the way that the UN is thinking about the future when there is a silence around racism. And so I'll pass it to Anna just to kind of build on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have just adding on what Miriam and Amina just shared. Well, I think when the UN was being created, like half of the world was still colonies. We need to remember that, 1945. And its predecessor, League of Nations, was an organization built to deal with European issues, basically. And how the UN still is this organization that center the West and the Western countries, and then the rest of the world kind of like goes along. Even when we think about very, very like concrete examples, when we are thinking about the UN, for example, their internship program, it's unpaid. So who can stay like 6 months full-time job going unpaid? Like this is an elitist way to keep the gates and to keep the power in the same hands, like through generations. And that is a movement to change at least with the internships, because how can we have diverse voices if one of the conditions that I have to stay 6 months to go unpaid? This is a concrete example. Then, and then I want to share my own story, like how I was able to kind of like break that when myself, as a product of public policies in Brazil, affirmative actions, as the first person in my family to go to college, when I started to work with the UN in 2012, I was also the only Black person there. And this is Brazil, when the majority of the population is Black. So even when we are thinking about, we can think about the headquarters, which is obviously majority white, but if we look at the local offices, they also represent the elite at that very countries. So, and I think that one of the things that we need to break is exactly that the Western point of view about everything is the starting point. When we are thinking about UN and when we are thinking about like these huge organizations like the World Bank, for example, or the IMF, where Americans are the one running it, even though nobody talks about it. We pretend it to be global when the people that run it, and if we look historically, has been people from the same nationality. And when we are thinking about who is part of the UN, are people that go to the same colleges, and they go to this, right? They go to Harvard, they go to Oxford, and those are also the people that the UN are looking for to work with them. So you might have a diversification on nationality, but you don't have on thinking, because they went through the same institutions. And that's also one thing that I want to point at, that the UN is part of a system that think that the degree is the most important things that folks can have when we are talking about human rights issues. And even when there is like a job description that don't need a PhD, for example, they will ask for a PhD. So it's also a way to keep adding barriers when there is no need for that. So I'm gonna stop here since it's like 10 minutes, but we could like keep going.
I love that you said that, Anna, because I think it's so important to, especially because of all the people that are on this call, to say that, because there are so many young women, there are so many young people that, you know, see that system that you're talking about as the only way to do women's human rights work is to get into the UN system. And I live in the Caribbean, and do you know how many young women and girls are interested in doing this work, that want to get into doing women's human rights work, are trying to do feminist work, and think that the only way to do this work is to do a UN exam? Like, that's the only way that they can do this work. And so, you know, for me, it's an unfortunate challenge that you know, as Black women, as Black girls, we are forced to kind of be part of this system that actually doesn't really want us to be there, that has so many barriers that block us from being there. And so for me, I have always found ways to push against that system. There have been so many people that say, oh, you should go work for the UN. And I've always said no. I've always said no, because there's other ways to do this work. And I think it's really important as Black women and girls that we forge our own path and we find our own way. There's nothing against the UN, but I feel like we have to find our own way, and we have to create mechanisms and systems that are for us, by us, that work for us, which is why, for example, we created the Black Feminist Fund as a place, as an institution, as a mechanism where we could fund our own dreams, where we could create a mechanism that we would resource feminist work that is for us, by us, that is led for us. You know, like, it's like, how do we create and fund our own alternatives? I know we're at 10 minutes. It's just because Anna raised that, I wanted to just kind of name that it's important to create alternatives and create spaces for ourselves where those don't exist. So sorry for taking that space, Cecile. Anna just kind of lit a fire that was just so resonant for me.
So, thank you so much. Let's move to our second question then. And our second question is, what are the key demands for racial justice and Afro-descendant people's rights in multilateral spaces right now? What are the key demands for racial justice and Afro-descendant people's rights in multilateral spaces right now. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can definitely like build on the conversation before for the first question, because also like talking from a Black European Black European perspective, I think it's really from my experience, it's really the thing. On the one side, we as Black feminists are already there saying, okay, enough is enough. We want to create our own spaces. We want to put our knowledge, our experience, our life experience into the center of the work that we are doing. And we are not always, looking for the white gaze or like trying to assimilate or trying to approach whiteness in itself. So it's really like the demand is there that we want to create our own spaces. But at the same time, again, from a Black European perspective, in Europe, like there are still countries where you have to there's even a question whether racism against Black people even exists. So this is also like one part of the demands where people are like, okay, we have to invest more in educational programs, we have to invest more in affirmative action. And I think those two sides, sometimes they go pretty well together, but sometimes they're also like, they attract different people in, but also outside of the UN system.
Thank you, Miriam.
Should I go, Amina?
Yes, please. Amina, please.
Yes. When I was thinking about the question, and I'm like, it's hard to talk about this for me, like when we're thinking about COVID, because my country right now, I'm gonna put it that way. I think we are seeing Brazil being destroyed in front of our own eyes. That's how I feel. And I feel that because we live in a world where authoritarian regimes are becoming stronger and stronger, and multiples in different parts of the world, people have so many issues to deal with. I also think that's on purpose. That's a project. So it's so many things that we cannot kind of see the bigger picture and see how they are organized and they are doing in a way. But so, and when I look at Brazil now, it's I always says that what we need is dignity, and that is dignity in living, meaning access to education, access to health, access to housing. It's very difficult to tell folks to think about anything else when they are hungry. And I think that's what happens when we are thinking about authoritarian regimes. You push people to such desperation levels that they are thinking only about survival. And I think that Brazil is one example. And with COVID and the numbers about COVID and numbers in Brazil, and I have to say that even the agenda of which lives we care about, not only on the local context, but on the international level. When COVID was starting in Europe, every day, all the time, folks were talking about Italy, how bad it was, talking about the names, the stories, how they were playing, how they were singing. Then in Brazil, we have 4 times the same number. I didn't hear any story about the Brazilians. So there is dignity in living, and there is dignity in dying. Because if you are such in a level of desperation, like even our process of dying is just so inhumane. So it's hard for me to talk about the demands now because my people are dying right now as we talk. So Brazil now went back to what we call the map of hunger. That's a global report on hunger around the world. People are going to a supermarket to buy bones. That's something that is a new business in Brazil. Nobody ever buy bones before, but because meat is too expensive, then that is a new business that folks will buy bones to eat. So the things are being dismantled in such a fast way that is hard for me. It's hard for me to not only talk about it, but to also see like that there is little to zero commotion about it. And I do think it's because Brazilian is a majority Black countries. I do think that if it was a different, if our people look differently, I do think that the level of empathy will also be different. And I just want to say one more thing, and just about like how language is also important, that I think that what I see in the global conversation sometimes is that people use intersectional to not use racism. And these are two very different things. I just want to say that. It's not because you are using the word intersectional that, implicitly race is there. No. And I also think that that's an on purpose thing, because people that work on international space, we work on language. We know the words that we are using, why we are using, why this comma, why this dot. So we also know why intersectional and not racism. So I'm gonna pause here.
Wow, Anna, gosh. I'm gonna take a minute to breathe because you said a lot. And I'm also taking a minute because you talked about Black death. And I think just taking a minute to acknowledge all of the sisters and siblings and family that we have lost just in the past year. I mean, it is beyond heartbreaking. And, you know, I think we have become just so used to death, to Black death. I mean, it passes in front of our face so much every day that we have become so accustomed. So I'm taking a moment. I'm taking a moment. Thank you for sharing. And what I will talk about is a little bit different. And forgive me, I'm going to do a little bit of a name dropping session in my response, because I think we don't talk enough about Black women's leadership and lift up the names of the people who are actually making the demands in the spaces and support Black women's leadership, because they are the ones who are out there making those demands, doing the work, making shifts in systems, and kind of doing all of that work and not getting acknowledged enough for the work that they're doing. And I think about the ways that, for example, in the sort of, don't say I said it, but the failure that was COP26, right? Look at the leadership that was Mia Motley, a Black woman from the Caribbean, right? Look at the young Black women from the Caribbean that were in that space, making shifts and making demands in the work around climate, making the connections around food security and mental health and well-being. The Black women that were Shanna Challenger and Erika Hill from Antigua, Aisha from Jamaica, Aisha Challenger from Jamaica. Look at, you know, women like the former head of the UN, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Nyika, who spent her time at the UN really advocating around issues of racism and really lifting up the leadership of Black women and Black women in her office, like Mary Elena John, who really, you know, have been doing that work in the back office, not really getting the acknowledgement for that work. Like, they are the ones making the demands. They are the ones doing that work every day. People don't know their names, right? Look at the amazing work for over 2 decades of Gay McDougall, who I should also acknowledge is also on, we don't have a board of directors at the Black Feminist Fund, but we have something called a Movement Leadership Council. But Gay McDougall, who was recently elected as an independent expert to serve on the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, Gay has been doing this work for as long as I've known her, and is just a brilliant and sharp mind, a Black woman who has been advocating for racial justice, right? Leading this work. And so I think there are so many Black women that are making these demands, that are making the connections and saying, and I know you talked about kind of really naming racism and not just sort of leaving it under the cloak of intersectionality. And there are folks that are making those demands, right? Not just saying the SDGs and not naming that racism was kind of ignored under the SDGs, right? But there are folks that are really calling, right? Even when you think about what has been lost, kind of named in 2015, but forgotten, that International Decade for People of African Descent. And if there are folks on the call who don't even know what that is, please look it up, because it goes until 2024. It came about in 2015 and folks don't even know what that is, right? So this is a call made up of women's major group folks, and yet we have not even done the work of really advocating for ratifying the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which ends in 2022, right? So there's so much that we have to do to call for in this collective of women's major group folks that we have to kind of push for and just really advocate for. And I named folks because I think it's really important that we support Black women's leadership, right? As folks mentioned, I'm super excited because I just kind of stepped into to join the chairship of the Global Fund for Women board. But why I'm really excited is because I get to sit next to and be in partnership with Latanya Maxfret, who's another amazing Black woman who is the executive director of the Global Fund for Women, where you see Black women in leadership, stand in partnership with them, support them, advocate with them, be in sisterhood and solidarity, in siblinghood with them, because we need that support. We need to be in community with other folks. And kind of that's what I want to name. I know that I'm not even sure if I'm responding to the question, but that's what I wanted to name in this moment, is that we need that. That's what we need from this space. I think that's even the response to the second question, but I'll say it again when Cecile asks. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Miriam, you have your hands up, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just would like to add something when it comes to the visibility and also the acknowledgement of Black feminist leadership, and also this, I mean, not surprising pattern of, you know, erasing the essential parts of intersectionality, of concepts like diversity, and so on and so on. So we can I'm always so surprised when like people use those terms without knowing or not even naming the people who have like created this concept. And I think this is especially also, I mean, what I have witnessed in the European context, that we have those like keywords and people want to be woke, people use it, but they don't even dare to mention where it's coming from. And even when we look back, like, last year, also in the European context, like people presented books that were like were well known in the Black community, but white people presented those books like, wow, we found this new book and it's so interesting and it's so revealed, like it's mind blowing. And Black folks were just like, okay, we've read this book like, I don't know, 20 years ago. So I think this is also like a pattern we can see, that if we as Black feminists, if we create knowledge, if we create change, it's being erased and then often picked up by white people and then presented as like they have found it somewhere. So I think this is also, I think, like you said, Amina, like we really have to get used to name the people and also make our ancestors and also the present feminist actors visible, because otherwise they will be erased.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to move to our last question, the third. And our last question is, how can the global feminist movement and the women's major group best support and center Black and Afro-descendant women and girls? How can the global feminist movement and the women's major group best support and center Black and Afro-descendant women and girls? The floor is yours, please. Would you like to start, Miriam? Then you have the floor.
I would like to give the floor to like the others because I just finished, so.
Okay. Any of you, Amina, Anna?
Be
Okay,
quick.
Amina, please.
Start, and I'll cede the space to Anna and Miriam. I will say this, and I'll actually maybe, because I responded to this question a little bit in the second question, I'll say that, you know, Black women are often kind of portrayed as recipients of aid or as kind of, you know, and I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of the work that I do in philanthropy and the work that kind of framing. So we're often seen as recipients of aid, or often as like, you know, disaster relief, or let's go save those, you know, those poor Black women over there, not necessarily as agents of change. And kind of what I was speaking to in the last question is that Black women are leading activism all over the world in so many powerful ways, right? Black women are leading, mobilizing, sustaining movements in just the most powerful ways. Yet at the same time, and here's where I want to bring in some of the research that we're actually finding from the Black Feminist Fund. We are actually in the middle of conducting some research that we've been doing together with the Human Rights Funders Network. And what we're finding, unfortunately, is that 0.1% of philanthropic dollars are going to initiatives being led by Black women and girls. 0.1% of global philanthropic dollars. And so my sort of call to action on this call from the women's major group, from all of the folks that are involved in any way around mobilizing all forms of resources, not just money, is that we need to push for more resources to go towards Black women-led initiatives. And I say that very intentionally because it's important. People say, well, we fund women. But what the research is showing us is actually that resources are not going to Black women-led work, and that's important. From what Miriam was saying, you know, Black women are producing knowledge. They're leading activism. We are doing so much work, as I was mentioning. We're leading kind of advocacy work in spaces like the COP26. We're doing so many things, and yet we are resourced the least. And so, and that includes Black trans women, it includes girls, it includes Black women, even at the margins of Black feminist movements. And so it's really important. My call to action is that in all of the ways, Black feminist movements need to be resourced more. The other thing I would say is to trust our leadership. Is we know what we're doing, and we know how to do the work in our movements in the ways that matter to us. So to trust our movements, to center our narratives, to support us by letting us kind of lead in the ways that are leaderful for us. And so create more spaces and platforms for us to tell our stories like this in our own voices, for our own communities. I think those are the things that I would share that are impactful and are meaningful. And I will cede spaces to my sister Anna and Miriam so that they can share also what's important to them.
I think that's it. Amina. I'm thinking like, what else can I say? That's it. Like maybe what I can add is that if we understand that the root cause of why this happens is due to colonialism and how we still not challenge our colonial thinking and our colonial practice, then we understand when Amina shared the number of 0.1, then in order to dismantle it, we need to work with decolonization, and we need to work on understanding power dynamics and dismantling it. Understanding that knowledge and academia is just one place where knowledge is, but not the only place. Understanding that there are multiple ways of living, of thinking, of being, of resisting, of learning, of sharing, that in the world that we live is not necessarily value. And when we change that, then we are reflecting the complexities of who we are. And we understand like how the systems of oppression works. That's all I can add to what Amina just said. It was just like, I was like, that's it.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. Thank you, Amina. And also thank you, Anna, for adding your thoughts. I also just want to make a short addition to that because like Anna already said, Amina's was just like perfect. What I would like to see is that in feminist spaces, we as Black feminists just being seen as like how we are. And I think what I always have in mind is when we then talk about, wow, so Black feminists are so powerful, they are so resilient because what they have experienced, and they still have like power to go on and remain resistant. And I think that's true because we have to, otherwise we won't survive. I mean, that's a fact. But at the same time, I personally also don't want to be reduced to that, because if people then see me as someone who's like super resilient and who always like keeps stays positive and goes on, then also resources aren't invested in my work because people are like, she's going to do it, like she's resilient, she can do it. So I really would like to see that more in the feminist space also, that Black feminists aren't just reduced to their resilience and to their powerful way of surviving, because I mean, we didn't choose to do that, so we had to learn. Yeah, I think that's just something I would like to add.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think, let me share a little bit what I got from these 3 questions. What I understood is that the legacy of colonialism, anti-Black racism, runs deep in UN global North and Western countries. And the Western countries see themselves as policy makers and the global South as their implementation space. And the power relations are sustained. The silence of SDGs around racism, and also when UN is thinking about its future, it is not only the policies, but also operationalization of the work inside UN overlooks race. So it's very important. And what I also understood is that leadership of Black women and how we should amplify those even more as they are made invisible even more. So we need really to see how to amplify all those. And I also got that the knowledge produced by Black women are overlooked, and Black women seen as recipients of aid, but not as agents of change. When in fact they are leading, Black women are really leading, mobilizing, sustaining movements. And we have to push for more resources to go to Black women's led initiatives. If you really want to change that, transformational change we are looking for. And we need to trust our leadership. That is very important. Understanding at academia is not one place where knowledge is. It is one place where knowledge is, but it's not the only one. We have more places. And Black feminists are not just reduced to their resilience. They are agents of change, and we have to understand that and to work towards that. I see Amina with the hand. Amina, please. And after that, if we still have 5 minutes to go around, and then we would like to move and see if there is any chance for our audience to share some of the questions. I hope they have some questions in the chat. I mean,
no, I was just clapping at your roundup. Please, the questions. You did a great job.
Okay, thank you. So if there is no other, Miriam, you wanted to say something? No. Okay. So let's see. Now we are turning to the open discussion portion of our meeting. I hope we'll have first direct the question